Hi, and welcome back to Reddit Whispers. Some silences are peaceful. They're the comfortable quiet between two people who know each other's hearts. But the silence I lived with for 20 years was a different kind. It was a roar. It was the sound of a door slamming, of a bond shattering, of a future I once believed in turning to dust. It was the sound of my son, Marcus, erasing me from his life. I am a retired history professor. My world has always been of quiet corridors, the scent of aging paper, and the belief that the most valuable things in life are the lessons we learn from the past. I tried to raise Marcus with this understanding. I taught him that character, like a great cathedral, is built slowly, stone by stone, on a foundation of integrity. He, however, saw my life's philosophy not as a foundation, but as a cage. He was a young man in a hurry, convinced that history was something to be escaped, not learned from. The breaking point, the day the silence began, was his 25th birthday. He came to me not as a son, but as a CEO pitching a hostile takeover of my life. He had a real estate development plan, a sprawling, high-risk venture that promised obscene returns. It was built on rezoning loopholes, predatory lending, and a level of debt that made my blood run cold. To secure the initial funding, he needed my signature. He needed me to co-sign, to leverage the house my wife, Eleanor, and I had spent 30 years paying for, to risk our entire life savings on his house of cards. I looked at the glossy prospectus, at the aggressive, soulless architecture, and at the feverish, greedy ambition in my son's eyes, and I said no. I tried to explain my reasoning, to teach him one last desperate lesson. I spoke of ethical growth, of community, of building things that last beyond a single fiscal quarter. He didn't hear a word of it. He heard only betrayal. He stood in my study, a room where I had once read him bedtime stories, and he dismantled me. He called my life's work a pathetic joke. He called my principles a coward's excuse for never taking a risk. "You're happy to be a footnote in other people's history," he spat, his words dripping with a contempt that seared my soul. "Because you're terrified to write a single chapter of your own." He told me he would succeed without me, that he would build an empire so vast it would cast a shadow over my entire insignificant life. And then he walked out. That was 20 years ago. The silence he left behind was total. I learned of his marriage to a woman named Serena, whose family valued social standing above all else, through a newspaper announcement. I learned of the birth of my grandson, Leo, from a distant cousin's Christmas card. For 2 decades, I was a ghost in my own family. I sent birthday cards that were never acknowledged, Christmas presents that were returned unopened. I became a footnote in his life, just as he had predicted. My own life continued its quiet academic rhythm. I retired. I tended my garden. I lived with the ghost of my wife and the louder, more terrible ghost of my son. I had made my peace with the silence. I had accepted my solitary existence as the price of my principles. Then, 6 months ago, the universe played its final cosmic joke. A former student of mine, a brilliant, gentle soul I had mentored years ago, passed away. He had founded a tech company based on a historical data mapping concept we had once discussed over coffee. He never forgot that conversation. In his will, he left me a substantial block of founder shares. Suddenly, I, the humble history professor, was a multi-millionaire. The irony was so thick I could barely breathe. The one thing that had cost me my son, the very thing I had spent my life teaching him not to worship, was now mine in an abundance that felt like a parody. News of an eccentric, newly wealthy academic is a novelty that the press finds irresistible. The story went public, and 2 weeks ago a package arrived. It was an invitation printed on cardstock so thick it felt like a floor tile. I was invited to celebrate the 45th birthday of Mr. Marcus Vance. at a lavish black-tie gala in the grand ballroom of the city's most expensive hotel. Tucked inside was a small typed note as cold and impersonal as a bank statement. "It's been a long time," it read. "I think it's time we talked." My first instinct was to burn it, but as I looked at the ostentatious invitation, a different feeling began to take shape, pushing through the decades of pain. It was the quiet resolve of a historian. My son had written 20 years of his story without me. Now he wanted to write me back in, but only as a character who could finance his next chapter. I decided I would attend his party. I would accept his invitation, but I would not arrive as the wealthy benefactor he was expecting. I would arrive as his father. I would arrive as a historian. And I would bring with me a final lesson, a primary source document that would force him and his world to confront the truth of the foundation upon which he had built his life. The silence was about to be broken, not by a conversation, but by a reckoning. The weeks before the gala were a period of quiet, methodical preparation. Marcus, I was sure, expected me to change. He probably envisioned me showing up in a new suit, with a new car, trying to fit into his world, a clumsy old man dazzled by his newfound wealth and desperate for his son's approval. I resolved to give him none of that. I was the same man I had always been. Only the number in my bank account was different, and that number was meaningless to me. My first call was not to a wealth manager, but to a private research firm. As a historian, I believe in understanding the context of an event before you attend it. I asked for a full financial and social workup on my son, Marcus Vance, and his wife, Serena. I wanted to understand the empire he had supposedly built. The report they delivered was a tragedy bound in a leather portfolio. On the surface, Marcus was a titan. He was a high-end property developer, his name attached to sleek, soulless glass towers and exclusive gated communities. He and Serena were staples of the society pages, their lives a curated performance of galas, charity boards, and exotic vacations. But the foundation of his cathedral was rotten. He was drowning in debt. Every project was a frantic gamble to pay off the loans from the last one. He was a master of image, but a failure at substance, a man running faster and faster on a treadmill of his own making. The 45th birthday gala, the report noted, was not just a celebration. It was a fundraising event, a desperate, high-stakes performance designed to lure new investors into his latest, most precarious venture. My inheritance wasn't just a desirable asset to him. It was the bailout he needed to prevent his entire world from collapsing. He hadn't invited his father to his party. He had invited a potential investor. Armed with this knowledge, I prepared my gift. I did not go to a jeweler or a luxury car dealership. I went back to my university, to the archives where I had spent my life. I knew what I was looking for. After days of searching through dusty municipal records, I found it, the original hand-drawn architectural plan for the first public library in our city, dated 1888. It was a beautiful, elegant document, a testament to a time when civic pride was measured in access to knowledge, not in the height of skyscrapers. It was built with small donations from ordinary citizens, a legacy for the entire community. It was everything my son's life was not. I had the delicate document professionally preserved and framed in simple dark maple. It was a gift of history, of principle. It was a mirror I was preparing to hold up to his life. For my grandson Leo, the boy I had never met, I chose something else. I found a beautiful antique brass compass. It was a tool of navigation, of finding one's way. I had a small plaque affixed to its wooden box, engraved with a simple phrase, "So you may always find your own true north." It was a desperate prayer, a hope that the boy had not yet been completely lost in his father's wilderness of mirrors. The night of the gala, I drove my 12-year-old sedan to the hotel. I handed the keys to a valet who looked at my car with an expression of profound confusion.
I walked into the ballroom, a simple professor in an old but well-kept wool suit, and felt the ripple of curiosity spread through the crowd of glittering, hungry-looking people. The room was a spectacle of obscene wealth, a symphony of champagne flutes and brayed laughter. And across the sea of diamonds and designer gowns, I saw him, Marcus. He was holding court, a strained, predatory smile plastered on his face.
He looked older than his 45 years, the stress of his precarious life etched in the lines around his eyes. He saw me, and for a fraction of a second, his mask slipped. I saw a flicker of the angry, wounded boy from 20 years ago, before it was replaced by the smooth, calculated warmth of the dealmaker. He strode towards me, his hand outstretched. "Dad," he boomed, his voice projecting for the benefit of those around him. "I'm so glad you could make it. You look, well." It was a lie, and we both knew it. I looked like what I was, his past, walking uninvited into his precarious present. He introduced me to Serena, a woman whose smile did not reach her cold, appraising eyes. And then to Leo. My grandson was a quiet, watchful 16-year-old, drowning in a tuxedo that looked 2 sizes too big for his soul. He shook my hand, his eyes filled with a tentative curiosity that felt like the first real human emotion I had encountered in that room. The evening wore on, a long performance of wealth. I was a ghost at the feast, observing, listening. I heard the whispered conversations about leverage, exposure, and return on investment. It was a room full of people who knew the price of everything and the value of nothing. And I watched my son, a frantic, desperate ringmaster, trying to keep his circus from collapsing. Finally, he pulled me aside, into a small private lounge. The fake warmth evaporated, replaced by an urgent, feverish intensity. He launched into his pitch, a grand vision of a new development, a new legacy, the Vance name on the tallest tower in the city. He didn't speak of reconciliation, he spoke of synergy. He didn't offer an apology, he offered a prospectus. He was not a son asking for his father, he was a failing CEO seeking a merger. I listened patiently. I let him lay out his entire desperate fantasy. Then I told him it was time for his birthday toast and for me to present my gift. I walked back into the ballroom, ready for my one and only contribution to his story. The clinking of a glass brought the ballroom to a hush. Marcus stood on a small elevated stage, a spotlight making the sweat on his brow glisten. He began a speech, a masterclass in corporate rhetoric disguised as a personal reflection. He spoke of vision, of legacy, of building for the future. He thanked his beautiful wife, his wonderful friends, and his valued business partners. Then he turned his gaze on me. And tonight, he said, his voice resonating with practiced emotion, is a truly special night. Because after many years, I am so honored to have my father here with me, a man of great intellect who taught me the value of history. The irony was so thick it was suffocating. He then invited me to the stage to say a few words and present my gift. As I walked up, a polite, predatory applause rippled through the room. I was the main event, the fatted calf in their financial drama. I took the microphone, but I did not look at my son. I looked out at the crowd, at the sea of expectant, greedy faces. And then I let my eyes find my grandson, Leo, who was standing near the back, watching me with a look of intense, soul-bearing curiosity. "My son is right," I began, my quiet, academic voice a stark contrast to his booming sales pitch. "I am a historian, and what history teaches us is that there are 2 ways to build. You can build for profit, or you can build for people. You can build on debt, or you can build on principle. One type of structure is designed to be sold. The other is designed to last." I could feel the atmosphere in the room shift, a subtle cooling. This was not the speech they were expecting. I gestured for an attendant to bring my gift to the stage. It was large, flat, and simply wrapped in plain brown paper. "Marcus speaks of his vision for a new tower," I continued, my eyes still on the crowd, but my words aimed directly at my son. "But tonight, I wanted to give him a reminder of a different kind of vision.
I unwrapped the gift, revealing the beautifully framed, hand-drawn plans of the old city library. I held it up for all to see. "This," I said, my voice clear and steady, "is the first public library of our city. It was not built by a single developer seeking a return on investment. It was funded by the small donations of thousands of ordinary citizens, teachers, factory workers, shopkeepers. They were not building an asset.
They were building a future. They were building a legacy of knowledge and community for generations they would never meet. This simple, elegant building has outlasted 100 speculative real estate booms and busts. It is still standing. It is still serving the people. That, Marcus, is a foundation." A stunned, profound silence fell over the ballroom. I had not given him a gift. I had delivered a verdict. In his world of price tags, I had presented an object whose value he could not possibly comprehend. And in doing so, I had exposed the utter worthlessness of his own pursuits. I had held up a mirror, and his entire life was reflected in it as a cheap, hollow imitation of true legacy. I turned to my son. His face was pale. His confident smile had collapsed into a mask of pure, humiliated rage. He was left speechless, holding a gift that was a public condemnation of everything he was. I walked off the stage. I went directly to my grandson. I pressed the small wooden box with the antique compass into his hand. "Leo," I whispered so only he could hear, "don't let anyone else tell you which way is north. You find it for yourself." He looked from the compass in his hand to my face, and for the first time I saw a flicker of his grandmother's strength, of my own stubborn resolve in his eyes. He nodded, a small, almost imperceptible gesture that was the only real conversation I had all night. My work was done. I had presented my research. I had delivered my lesson. I turned and walked out of that suffocating ballroom, out of my son's life for the second and final time, leaving him alone on his stage, holding the ghost of a legacy he had never been able to grasp. I drove home under a sky full of stars I couldn't see from the city. The noise of the gala, the brittle laughter and the clinking glasses faded behind me, replaced by the quiet hum of my old car's engine. I did not feel victorious. I felt a profound and aching sorrow, the kind a surgeon must feel after a necessary but brutal amputation. I had cut away the diseased limb in the hope of saving whatever remained of my family's soul, even if it was just a single frightened boy with a compass. The next day, the phone rang. It was Marcus. I expected him to scream, to curse, to rage. But the voice on the other end was hollow, defeated. The predator was gone, replaced by the wounded animal. "Why?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Why would you do that to me, in front of everyone? You destroyed me." "No, Marcus," I said, my voice tired but firm. "You destroyed yourself. I just read the footnotes aloud. You built a house of cards on a floodplain and were trying to sell me fire insurance. I declined to buy." "So that's it?" he choked out. 20 years of silence, and you come back just to humiliate me and walk away again?" "You didn't invite your father to your party, Marcus," I said, the final painful truth laid bare. "You invited a bank. The bank reviewed your proposal and declined the loan. That's all that happened." "So that's it?" he choked out. 20 years of silence, and you come back just to humiliate me and walk away again?" "You didn't invite your father to your party, Marcus," I said, the final painful truth laid bare. "You invited a bank. The bank reviewed your proposal and declined the loan. That's all that happened. I told him I wished him no ill will, but that I would not, could not, be the foundation for another of his castles in the sky. I told him that true wealth, the kind I was interested in, was not on his balance sheets. Then I said goodbye and hung up the phone, ending our 20-year conversation. Weeks turned into a month.
I heard through the financial news that my son's grand development project had collapsed. His key investors, who had been at the party and witnessed my presentation, had quietly pulled their funding. They were sharks, and they had smelled the blood in the water. Marcus was facing financial ruin, the inevitable collapse of the empire he had sold his soul to build. I felt a deep paternal sadness for the man he was, but no guilt for the choice I had made. One Saturday morning, my doorbell rang. Standing on my porch was my grandson, Leo. He was dressed not in a tuxedo, but in jeans and a simple jacket. In his hand, he held the antique compass. "He lost everything," Leo said, his voice quiet but steady. "The house, the cars, everything. My mom is not handling it well." He looked up at me, his eyes clear and searching. "He's angry. He blames you. But I've been thinking about what you said, about foundations. I'm sorry for what your family is going through," I said, and I meant it. "It's not your fault," Leo said, a surprising maturity in his voice. "He built it. It fell." He held up the compass. "I've been trying to figure this thing out, and I was wondering if you could tell me about the library, for real." I stepped aside and opened the door to my home, a home filled with books and history and quiet integrity. "Come in, Leo," I said. "I have so much to tell you." As he stepped across the threshold, the 20-year silence in my house was finally, truly broken. It was replaced by the sound of a new conversation, a new beginning. My inheritance hadn't saved my son, but it had given me a chance to offer his son a different kind of legacy. Not a legacy of wealth, but a legacy of worth. It was a foundation I could finally help to build. Thanks for watching Reddit Whispers. Every story leaves a mark. What's the one moment that still shapes who you are today? Tell us in the comments.